Hello, so we are back today with the beginning of our upper appendicular skeleton. So appendicular skeleton refers to your appendages, so your arms and legs. So I think that I'm going to split this up into probably two sections. So we're going to start with our shoulder girdle. So when we refer to the shoulder girdle, we're referring to, obviously, our shoulder area, our clavicle here in the front, and our scapula in the back. So something that's really important for you guys, especially with my criminal justice majors, when looking at bone remains, we can tell a lot about the remains from the shoulders. So you might find very small scapulas and wonder, okay, is this a small human? Is this an animal? And there's something very unique about the human skeleton, right? What do we do that most animals don't, right? We walk on two legs, which means that our shoulder structure is very different, right? We can do this amazing thing, right? We can rotate our arm all the way around in its socket. So you'll see that here in the shoulder when we start diving a little bit deeper into the scapula and how it connects to our humerus, which is the upper part of our arm. That's very, very unique. So most animals, if we think about animals that are quadrupeds or walk on all fours, they have one kind of range of motion. They do protraction and retraction, right? So think of your dog or cat at home. They can only move their arm, you can't see me, they can only move their arm like forward and back, protraction, retraction. We can circle our arm 360 degrees. So that's really unique, and that is because we are bipedal, right? We don't have to put any of our body weight onto our front limbs or our shoulders. Okay, so let's dive into some landmarks. If you guys are following along in your book, which you should, we're on chapter 11, okay? Shoulder girdle, clavicle, and scapula. So let's talk about our clavicle first. Let me side this really quickly. This is going to be the inferior side. Okay, so I think it's mirrored for you guys, but this is my left clavicle. Okay. Fun fact, the clavicle is the most commonly broken bone in the human body. Okay. So think about the fact that this here is holding our chest, right? And our shoulders upright. So when you fall, you put your arm out to catch yourself. There's a lot of pressure. Yes, this is also a left. Okay. So in your shoulder joint, these are, hold on, let me get a good angle. These are kind of sitting like this. So this is your scapula, right? So this is your back. And this is your clavicle. Okay? So they kind of sit like this, right? And this space here is like your insides, right? This is like your upper arm, and then your lungs would sit below it. Okay? So this is like the joint, okay? So you're putting, like, if you fall, you're putting a lot of pressure into that's getting a lot of impact, and it's not a very big bone or robust bone, so it's very commonly broken. You see it all the time when people fall and they go to catch themselves and they hurt their shoulder, they'll have broken their clavicle. So just a little tidbit. So that's something to look for when we get into more like after our section where we learn all about the bones. We're going to learn about how like bones heal and mend and how they're formed. So if somebody has had a break on their clavicle, that will show, right? That will show in the human remains, and we'll be able to say, oh, this is an individual that had broken their clavicle. If it's a young skeleton, we might be able to say, oh, it's somebody who's pretty active, right? Because typically that might be a sports injury. Or if it's an older skeleton, somebody who's a senior individual, it might have been from a slip and fall. So there's like those are little tips and tricks, for you guys as you're kind of going through the course. Okay, so let's talk about this bone. So the first thing we're going to look at. Let's see. Oh, you know what? So, okay, the first landmark you have, and then this is your term sheet. The term sheets are in each module, but you also have them on this way. If you go over here, you should see a little thing that says course resources. They're in there as well. So the first landmark I have on your clavicle is your trapezoid line. So if you're looking at your book, page 194, you'll see we have an inferior view right at the top. So inferior is we're looking at the bottom of the clavicle. Okay, so this is the underside, meaning that in my body, right, it would be positioned like this, and I'm looking at the side that's pointing down towards my feet. You're going to see what we call the trapezoid line. Let's see. It's a little rough on this one. Okay, so we're looking here. Nope, sorry, here. So let's actually backtrack a little bit. The clavicle has two ends. One of them is this sort of blunt end. You see that? That's going to be the end closest to your sternum, right? Because we have a clavicular notch in our sternum. And then we have an end that's sort of flat. Okay, when it sits in your body, it sits flat like this. That end's going to go back towards your scapula. So we're looking at towards the end that is closer to the sternum, okay? And we're going to look on the inferior side, and we're going to see this line right here, okay? That is your trapezoid line. Why the heck is that called our trapezoid line? So if any of you guys are into like physical fitness or weight training, you know that you have your traps or your trapezius muscles, right, on your back. So your trapezoid line is an area in which some of your portions of your or your trapezius muscles attach. So trapezoid line, okay? Conoid tubercle. Okay, so again, we're looking at that underside. So if we go past our trapezius line, it's not so easy to see on here. But right about here, it's better in your book. This is a cast. This isn't an actual human bone. So sometimes some of these things aren't as awesome. But like right about here, so right after your trapezoid line, you're going to see a tubercle. And that's your conoid tubercle, okay? Conoid tubercle. Subclavian groove. So you see how it's kind of S-shaped if you're looking at the underside? There's an indentation here, a groove. Okay? That's what we call our subclavian groove. Why? Let's break that down. Your clavicle, clavian, we're getting fancy. Sub means under. And then groove is just that. It's a groove or an indentation. So that literally translates into groove under the clavicle. Subclavian groove. And then we have our costal tuberosity. So if we're looking more towards this end here, you're going to see this tuberosity. That's our costal tuberosity. Okay, so if you guys remember, costals were ribs, right? So it's a tubercle for our ribs. So it's a point where like ribs at that first rib attaches. So we've got those four landmarks. We've got our trapezoid line, our conoid tubercle, our subclavian groove, our costal tuberosity. So our trapezoid line is where that trapezius muscle is going to attach. The conoid tubercle is just after that subclavian groove, the groove on the underside. And then we have a costal tuberosity where that first rib is going to attach. Okay, so this end here, the more robust round end, is going to be towards the sternum. And then the round smooth, or the smooth flat end, is going to be pushing back and attaching to your scapula. Okay. You guys don't have to worry about siding, but that would be how you would side, basically. Okay, so let's talk about our scapula. Okay, so our scapula has two sides. Okay, we have this flat side without a lot of landmarks. That's going to be our anterior side, meaning that in your body, okay, if I were to swear, this would be the part that's facing forward, okay, towards the front. The posterior side, which has all the cool landmarks, is the side that faces back, okay? So, and you can feel all of these in your own or a friend. Ask permission first before you feel anybody's scapula. But so everything that has like these landmarks pretty much are going to be on your posterior side of your scapula. Okay, so in our book, our scapula starts on 196, and that's a beautiful view of the anterior side. So you're going to see there's not a lot going on there, and then you're going to see this nice view on the next page and the next few pages of all of our landmarks. Okay, so our first landmark that we have is going to be our glenoid fossa. So actually skip ahead to page 198. You're going to see a view of the scapula similar to this, okay? So the very first landmark we're going to find is right here. It's called our glenoid fossa, okay? So a fossa is an indentation, and this is where our humerus connects, okay? So it's a nice socket, right? This is a ball and socket joint. That's how we get that beautiful rotation, okay? So that is our glenoid fossa. So we have a supraglenoid tubercle and an infraglenoid tubercle. So what that basically means is we've got a tubercle on top and a tubercle below our glenoid fossa. So our supraglenoid tubercle is going to be right here, okay? And our infra is going to be right here, okay? So, let's see if you guys can see that. So that's the infra, and that's the supra, okay? So, again, going back to those basic anatomical terms, supra means below, above, infra means below. So we can find our glenoid fossa, we can find our supraglenoid tubercle, and our infraglenoid tubercle. Okay, this one is tough. This is called our coracoid process. And go ahead and take a look at back page 196 so that you guys can follow along. Okay, the reason this is tough is if you guys remember from our facial bones, we had a coronoid process. The coronoid process was on the manubrium, right? Our jaw. Our coracoid process is on our scapula, okay? So you might want to circle that C. You might want to make a special note with a star that you guys don't get those two confused. We don't see a lot of those where they're so similar that they could be tricky, but that is one of them, okay? So if you're looking here, you can see there's a whole lot of business sticking out, right? A whole lot of processi, okay? So we're not looking at this big one, okay? Because this big one comes all the way from the spine. We're looking at this process here, okay? That is our coracoid process, right? And it's closer to the anterior side, okay, the front. So this is the coracoid process, okay? It's right here on the front of this bone, coracoid. The acromion, okay, or the acromion process is this other big one, okay? Your acromion, right? It's so special that it really only needs one name. We don't even need to call it the coracoid or the acromion process. We can just call it the acromion, right? It's like Cher, it's like Beyonce. It's got its own thing going on. It only needs one name. Okay. Then we have our scapular notch. So in your book, you guys have a really nice photo on page 196 of your scapular notch. This scapula has a really, really tiny notch. Okay, that's my scapular notch. Okay, so it's on the anterior side. Okay, just next to that coracoid process. Okay, that's the notch. Some scapulas you'll see very big, wide notches. Your scapular spine. So your scapular spine on the posterior side. It's this big spine, right? This is a really obvious spine. Big, big spine that sticks out. That's the thing, if you were to touch, that's what you're feeling, okay? So if you feel the back of your scapula, you're gonna feel this, right? So you have muscles on top of that like are here. These are the ones that always get tense. And then some muscles below that, right? But that is your scapular spine. And your scapular spine leads right into that acromion, okay? So your scapular spine. So the next two, we should be able to take these two terms together because they're very similar. So we've got a supraspinatus fossa and an infraspinatus fossa. So spinatus is just another fancy pants way of saying spine, okay? So if we have a fossa, a supra fossa as a fossa above, so our supraspinatus fossa is going to be right here. It's this area, okay? So it's the area that these little shoulder muscles here, right, that always get tense, that's where those are sitting, okay? They're sitting right in that supraspinatus fossa, okay? So we've got that indentation here, okay? And then we have an spinatus fossa. So it's the fossa below the spine, okay? So make a little note, spinatus and spine equal each other. They're the same thing, okay? Superior and inferior angles. Again, we're going to take these terms together. So if you look at this bone, okay, trying to get it all into the shot, okay? So we have an angle at the top and an angle at the bottom, right? But we've got this point here at the top. So this is our superior. Again, it's the top. It's closest to the head. We've got a superior angle and an inferior angle. So we've got two angles, superior and inferior. All right, so let's put this back in standard anatomical position. Okay, so we've got a medial border and a lateral border. Okay, so the easiest thing for me is always to find this, right? This has to be lateral because your arm is sticking out of here, right? So it's got to be lateral. So this is going to be your lateral border, okay? It can't be medial, otherwise your arm is going to be doing some weird thing sticking into the middle of your body. So I always find this and know that our glenoid fossa is where our arm attaches. This has to be lateral. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it, okay? So this is our lateral border, okay? And then our medial border, okay? And then we have one more term, and I'm going to go back and review. So we found our lateral border, we found our medial border, and then I'm showing you guys the anterior side. And as I mentioned, there's not a lot of landmarks on our anterior side, right? It's very smooth, okay? But as you can see, it does sort of have a shape, right? A fossa. So this is our subscapular fossa. So it's the subscapular fossa. We're saying it's below the scapula because sub means below, but this is our subscapular fossa, right? This area here on the underside or the anterior smooth side of our scapula. All right, that was a lot. Let's go back and review through them. So our glenoid fossa, right? That's going to be where our humerus attaches, right? This socket joint. We have a supraspinatus tubercle and an infraglenoid tubercle, infraglenoid tubercle. It's supraglenoid tubercle, infraglenoid tubercle. Ooh, tongue twisters. We have two processes. The smaller one that's closest to our glenoid fossa is called the coracoid process. The big one attached to our spine, ooh, that made my hand look huge. This big one attached to the spine is the acromion. You have a scapular notch, okay, which is this guy right here. And it's very, very small on this bone. Scapular notch, the scapular spine, right? This big old spine here that leads up into our acromion. We have two fossas related to the spine. We've got our supraspinatus fossa and our infraspinatus fossa. We have two angles, a superior angle on the top, and I'm going to back up. Superior angle on the top, inferior angle on the bottom. We have two borders, okay? So this here is going to be our lateral border, right? Because it's where our arm connects. It's got to be going laterally. And then we have our medial border, again, closest to the midline or closest to the spine. And then we have our subscapular fossa, okay? So on this anterior side, okay? It's very smooth. This is our subscapular fossa. All right, so that's everything that you guys have for the shoulder girdle. To make sure that I know you guys have gotten this far and you're listening to the lectures, I'm going to ask you a bonus question right now. So just shoot me an email, okay? Don't put this in the discussions. Send me an email. And in that email, go ahead, just subject bonus question, answer me this question. So David Boreanaz is a Western New York native, okay? He's a TV star, if you will. And he starred in a very famous show that was based on forensic anthropology. So send me the name of that show, and you guys will get 5 points, okay? Added to your overall grade. So that might help push you up to that kind of next grade level if you need it. 5 points. Bonus question. What famous TV or what TV show was David Boreanaz on that was starred in or whatever that's based on forensic anthropology? So shoot that over to me. That's how I know that you guys are listening to the very end of these lectures. All right. See you in the next lecture.